There's a difference between doing your job and owning your mission, between completing tasks and creating meaning, between being a worker and being a leader. Thinking like a leader doesn't require a title, a corner office, or a fancy business card. It requires perspective, a mindset, a way of looking at the world that transforms ordinary effort into extraordinary impact. Most people spend their lives following instructions. They clock in, do what's expected, and go home. They measure their day by what they've completed, not by what they've contributed. And that's fine until you realize that progress doesn't come from those who simply follow the rules. It comes from those who understand the reason behind them. Leaders think differently. They don't just ask, what do I need to do? They ask, why does it matter? Because when you understand the why, the what becomes more meaningful. When you see the purpose, you find energy in the mundane. That's what separates those who work to survive from those who work to create something that outlasts them. Think about the people who inspire you, the ones who seem to move others effortlessly. They're not necessarily smarter, more talented, or even more experienced. But they see the world differently. When others see a list of tasks, they see a vision taking shape. When others are waiting for direction, they're already moving toward possibility. Leaders don't wait for permission to care. They don't wait for someone to tell them what's wrong before they fix it. They don't wait for a crisis to take action. They step forward because they see ownership as a responsibility, not a reward. There's a story I love about two bricklayers. When asked what they're doing, the first one says, "I'm laying bricks." The second says, "I'm building a cathedral." Both are doing the same task, but one is a worker while the other is a leader in spirit. The worker sees the job, the leader sees the purpose. And that difference changes everything from how you show up to how others follow you. If you only think like a worker, your mindset is limited by your job description. But if you think like a leader, your impact becomes limitless. Because leadership isn't about authority, it's about influence. It's about the way you make people feel, the example you set, and the courage you show when things aren't certain. Leaders see beyond the task, they see the purpose. They understand that even the smallest job has meaning if it contributes to something larger. A leader flipping burgers might be building a culture of teamwork. A leader answering phones might be shaping a customer's first impression of the company. Leadership begins when you connect your effort to a purpose bigger than yourself. And that brings us to something crucial: ownership over obedience. Workers wait for instructions. Leaders take initiative. A worker says, "That's not my job." A leader says, "How can I help?" Leadership thinking isn't about following every rule. It's about taking responsibility for the result. It's about caring enough to improve the process, even when no one's watching. When you think like a worker, you protect your comfort. When you think like a leader, you protect your standards. You refuse to cut corners, not because someone told you not to, but because it violates your own values. That's ownership. And ownership doesn't mean perfection, it means accountability. It means being the one who raises your hand when something goes wrong and says, "That's on me, let's fix it." The people who take ownership create trust, and trust is the currency of leadership. But thinking like a leader also means playing the long game. Workers focus on getting through the day, leaders focus on building the future. It's easy to prioritize what's urgent over what's important. It's easy to seek short-term comfort instead of long-term growth. But leaders know that growth rarely feels good in the moment. It's uncomfortable, it's inconvenient, it demands sacrifice. The worker asks, "What do I get out of this?" The leader asks, "What will this create in the long run?" That simple shift in thinking determines whether you're reacting to life or shaping it. Leaders understand that the hardest days often define the strongest people. They embrace challenges as opportunities to refine their vision, not reasons to abandon it. They know that progress is built on patience, the kind of patience that says, "This might take time, but it will be worth it." And perhaps the most misunderstood part of leadership is this: you don't need authority to lead. Influence doesn't come from a title, it comes from trust. The best leaders are often found in the middle of the team, not at the top. They lead through example, through consistency, through empathy. When you think like a leader, you focus less on controlling people and more on inspiring them. You stop demanding compliance and start earning commitment. You realize people follow those who make them feel seen, valued, and capable. A worker says, "I'll do what I'm told." A leader says, "I'll do what's right." That takes courage. It's easier to blend in, to stay silent, to follow the crowd. But leadership thinking asks you to stand out, to be the person who raises the uncomfortable question, who challenges the easy answer, who reminds everyone what matters most. You see, leadership isn't about always being right, it's about being real. It's about showing up with integrity, admitting mistakes, and choosing growth over ego. Workers seek approval. Leaders seek progress. The worker's question is, will they like it? The leader's question is, will this make us better? And that's the pivot point of every great organization, every great movement, every great life. Because progress isn't about pleasing people, it's about pushing boundaries. When you think like a leader, you stop chasing recognition and start chasing results. You care less about being noticed and more about being useful. You measure your day not by how many things you checked off your list, but by how much you move the needle for those around you. And the truth is, anyone can make this shift. It's not about age, status, or experience. It's about mindset. The moment you start asking why instead of just what, the moment you take ownership instead of waiting for permission, the moment you focus on impact instead of instruction, you become a leader. Leadership is a choice. Every day, in every meeting, on every project, you have a choice to think like a worker or think like a leader. The worker asks, "What's expected of me?" The leader asks, "What's possible here?" When you start thinking like a leader, your work stops being about survival and starts being about significance. You begin to see the ripple effect of your actions. You realize that how you show up affects how others show up. You become the example others want to follow, not because you're perfect, but because you care. The real power of leadership is service. It's not about having people work for you, it's about working for them. A leader looks at the team and asks, "What do they need from me to be their best?" The worker asks, "What do I need to do to keep my job?" That's the difference between existing in the system and elevating it. When you think like a leader, you create culture. You set standards by how you behave, not by what you say. You remind people that purpose is contagious. You make excellence the expectation, not the exception. And maybe the most beautiful part of leadership is that it multiplies. When one person starts thinking like a leader, others begin to do the same. It creates a chain reaction of trust, initiative, and vision. A team of workers gets things done. But a team of leaders, they change the world. So, if you want to make an impact, don't wait for the promotion, don't wait for the recognition, and don't wait for the perfect moment. Start thinking differently. Ask the harder questions. Take ownership where others make excuses. Lead where others hesitate. Because the world doesn't need more workers. It needs more leaders, people who see beyond the checklist, who act with purpose, and who care enough to create change. Every day you have the chance to show up as either a worker or a leader. Choose to see meaning, choose to take ownership, choose to think long-term, choose to influence with integrity, choose growth over approval. That's how transformation happens, not in grand gestures, but in small, consistent choices to lead, not follow. So think like a leader, not a worker. Because when you change the way you think, you change the way you work. And when you change the way you work, you change the world. There's a quiet difference between those who simply work and those who lead. You can see it in how they show up, how they speak, how they make others feel. It's not in the title on their door or the number of people reporting to them. It's in the way they think. To think like a leader means to see beyond the immediate, to look past the checklist and into the impact. It means understanding that leadership is not about having power, but about taking responsibility. Most people are taught to think like workers. Do your job, follow the plan, stay in your lane. But progress has never come from people who only did what they were told. Progress comes from those who see what's missing and choose to create it. There's a moment in every career where you realize that effort alone isn't enough. You can work hard, follow every rule, and still feel stuck. That's because workers think in terms of execution, leaders think in terms of evolution. The worker asks, "What do I need to do today?" The leader asks, "What are we trying to build over time?" The mindset shift begins when you stop looking at your job as a list of tasks and start viewing it as an opportunity to contribute to something larger. When you think like a worker, you see yourself as a small part of a machine. When you think like a leader, you see yourself as a vital part of a movement. That change in thinking transforms not only your results, but also your sense of meaning. Leaders are driven by purpose. Workers are driven by direction. The worker waits for someone to say, here's what you need to do. The leader says, here's what we can make better. The difference isn't knowledge or skill, it's initiative. It's the courage to act without waiting to be asked. In every organization, there are people who don't have leadership titles but carry leadership energy. They're the ones who make others feel valued, who ask deeper questions, who remind the group why they started in the first place. That's because true leadership is never assigned, it's earned. It comes from showing up differently. Workers often define success by completion. Did I finish what I was told to do? Did I meet the deadline? Leaders define success by contribution. Did this make things better? Did it bring us closer to our vision? That's the difference between being efficient and being effective. Efficiency keeps things moving. Effectiveness moves things forward. Leaders see the why behind the work. They connect the dots between daily effort and greater purpose. When you understand why you're doing something, you bring more energy, creativity, and care to it. You start to see even small tasks as part of a larger story. The truth is, the work itself doesn't change. What changes is how you see it. And they play the infinite game, one focused not on beating others, but on making the mission stronger every day. This long-term thinking requires discipline, because it's tempting to go for what's easy now instead of what's right later. It's tempting to protect your comfort instead of building your character. But the leader says, if it affects us, it's my responsibility. Ownership doesn't mean doing everything yourself. It means caring enough to ensure things get done right. It means being invested in the outcome, not just the assignment. Ownership builds trust. When people know you'll take responsibility rather than pass blame, they rely on you, they follow you. They listen when you speak. That's how influence begins, not through authority, but through consistency. Leadership isn't a speech or a strategy, it's a daily practice of showing up with integrity. And integrity is what allows leaders to see beyond themselves. Workers often focus on what they can get from the job, pay, praise, or promotion. Leaders focus on what they can give clarity, confidence, and courage. Leadership thinking is about adding value even when it's not expected. It's asking, what can I contribute instead of what's in it for me? But thinking like a leader also means learning to play the long game. Workers are motivated by the next paycheck or the next project. Leaders are motivated by the next generation. They make decisions not for applause today, but for sustainability tomorrow. They don't rush to prove they're right. They commit to doing what's right. It's easy to get caught up in short-term thinking. We want quick wins, immediate results, instant feedback. But leadership requires patience. It's about planting seeds you may never see grow. It's about believing that your effort will matter even if the results take time. A worker says, I just want to get through this week. A leader says, I want to make sure what we build this week still matters a year from now. That kind of thinking takes courage. It's much easier to settle for comfort than to pursue contribution. But the world doesn't change through comfort, it changes through commitment. Leaders are not focused on looking busy. They're focused on creating clarity. They're not obsessed with being right. They're committed to doing what's best. And most importantly, they understand that leadership is about people, not processes. You can't lead without empathy. You can't inspire without trust. You can't build anything meaningful if you only care about the outcome and not the people creating it. Workers manage tasks. Leaders nurture potential. Leaders see beyond what a person is capable of today and imagine who they could become tomorrow. They don't demand perfection, they cultivate growth. They understand that mistakes are not failures, they're feedback. That's why great leaders aren't afraid to be vulnerable. They admit when they don't know, when they need help, when they've made a mistake. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's authenticity. It invites others to bring their full selves to the table. When a leader says, I don't have all, the answers. They give permission for others to speak up, to share, to innovate. When you think like a leader, you stop worrying about being the smartest person in the room. Instead, you focus on bringing out the best in everyone else. Leadership is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe to experiment, to challenge, and to grow. And here's the beautiful thing. Leadership thinking is contagious. When one person on a team starts taking ownership, starts showing initiative, starts connecting actions to purpose, others begin to follow. It creates a culture shift from compliance to commitment, from fear to trust, from silence to collaboration. If you want to see the impact of leadership thinking, watch how it changes the energy in a room. Workers walk in with questions, what do we need to do today? Leaders walk in with conviction, here's what we're building together. That kind of energy lifts everyone. It transforms workplaces into communities and goals, into missions. The moment you start thinking like a leader, your work gains a new kind of weight. It's no longer about crossing things off your to-do list. It's about creating momentum for something that matters. You realize that your job isn't just a job, it's a platform to serve, to influence, to make things better for others. And maybe that's the essence of it all. Leaders serve. They don't demand loyalty. They earn it by giving it first. They don't ask for effort. They inspire it through their example. Leadership is not about being above others. It's about standing beside them, reminding them of the purpose that brought them together. When you think like a leader, you also learn to detach your ego from your role. You stop defining your worth by your position. Because leadership is not a status you achieve, it's a standard you uphold. It's about showing up in a way that makes others stronger, not smaller. Even in moments of uncertainty, leaders focus on what they can control, their attitude, their effort, their empathy. They understand that their behavior sets the tone for everyone around them. If they panic, others panic. If they remain calm, others find courage. Leadership thinking means recognizing that every action sends a message. And perhaps the hardest part of thinking like a leader is that it requires you to keep growing. Workers often stop once they feel competent. Leaders never stop learning. They stay curious. They ask questions. They seek feedback. They remain students of their own craft because they know growth doesn't happen by accident. It happens by intention. Every day, you have two choices: to think like a worker or to think like a leader. The worker says, I'll do what's asked. The leader says, I'll do what's needed. The worker says, it's not my fault. The leader says, it's my sixth responsibility. The worker says, I'll wait for direction. The leader says, I'll find the way. This mindset is not reserved for CEOs or managers. It's available to anyone who chooses it. The moment you start seeing purpose instead of tasks, responsibility instead of orders, and growth instead of comfort, you are thinking like a leader. So, wherever you are, in an office, a classroom, a shop floor, or your own home, don't underestimate your ability to lead. You don't need permission to make things better. You don't need authority to have influence. All you need is the decision to see your work as a contribution, not just a requirement. Because the truth is, the world has enough workers. It needs more leaders, people who care enough to connect, to challenge, to create, people who see the potential in others and the purpose in themselves. Thinking like a leader means showing up differently every day, even when no one notices. It means believing that what you do matters, even when no one says thank you. It means having the courage to act with integrity, even when it costs you comfort. That's how change begins, not with grand gestures, but with quiet conviction, not with authority, but with example, not with position, but with purpose. So, wherever you are, whatever your role, choose to think like a leader, not a worker. Because when you do, your work becomes more than a task. It becomes a legacy. Leadership isn't a title you earn. It's a way you think, a way you see the world, a way you choose to show up when it matters most. Thinking like a leader isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or the one who has all the answers. It's about seeing beyond yourself, beyond your tasks, your goals, your comfort. It's about understanding that real impact begins when you stop asking what you can get and start asking what you can give. Every workplace has two types of people: those who think like workers and those who think like leaders. Both may have the same role, the same responsibilities, even the same title, but their impact is completely different. The worker thinks in terms of my job. The leader thinks in terms of our mission. That difference in thinking transforms everything, not just the results, but the relationships, the culture, the trust. When you think like a worker, you're focused on doing things right. When you think like a leader, you're focused on doing the right things. That shift requires courage, because it's much easier to stay within the lines than to ask whether the lines themselves still make sense. It's safer to complete the checklist than to question if the checklist leads anywhere meaningful. Leaders don't just see what is, they see what could be. They look at the same situation as everyone else, but imagine a different future. They see possibility where others see limitation. That's what separates vision from routine. Workers wait for change to come from above. Leaders become the catalyst for change where they stand. There's a story about a janitor at NASA during the Apollo missions. When someone asked him what his job was, he replied, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." That's the mindset of a leader. His job didn't change, but his sense of purpose did. He didn't see himself as cleaning floors. He saw himself as part of something historic. That's what happens when you connect your work to a mission bigger than yourself. It transforms everything you do. Thinking like a leader means connecting dots others overlook. It means seeing the purpose behind the process. When you understand the why, the how becomes more powerful. Purpose gives effort meaning, and meaning fuels persistence, especially when things get difficult, because they always do. Workers often stop when things get hard. Leaders persist because they believe in something beyond the moment. They know that setbacks are not signals to stop, but invitations to grow stronger. Leaders aren't immune to fear. They simply refuse to let fear make their decisions for them. They ask, what's the right thing to do? Even when it's uncomfortable. Leadership thinking isn't about control, it's about responsibility. Workers think, it's not my problem. Leaders think, if it affects us, it's mine to help solve. That mindset creates ownership. Ownership builds trust. And trust creates the kind of environment where people feel safe to take risks, to contribute ideas, to be real. When people feel safe, they perform better. Not because they're told to, but because they want to. That's the power of leadership thinking. It transforms compliance into commitment. It's not about getting people to work harder. It's about giving them a reason to care. Leaders understand that the most important question they can ask isn't, what do I need to do? But why does this matter? The moment you start asking that question, your work shifts from being mechanical to being meaningful. You start to lead, even if no one calls you a leader. Leadership begins the moment you take initiative. It's when you stop waiting for direction and start finding ways to make things better. It's when you see something broken and decide to fix it, not because it's your job, but because it's the right thing to do. That's the essence of ownership, caring beyond obligation. The challenge is that thinking like a leader often means standing alone. It means raising your hand when something doesn't feel right, even if no one else does. It means choosing principles over popularity. Workers seek approval, leaders seek progress. Approval fades. Progress lasts. Leaders think long-term. Workers think about today's task. Leaders think about tomorrow's impact. They understand that building something meaningful takes time, patience, and consistency. They don't chase quick wins at the expense of lasting results. Once you see meaning, you can't unsee it. The greatest shift happens when ownership replaces obedience. Workers wait for approval, leaders act with accountability. A worker will say, that's not my problem.